It's unacceptable to have different people doing different things because you will not get the same result and you will have a different level of burnout per person.
We still have to make sure that we have, this is how you do this, this is how you do this, this is how you do this, and it should work generalized for your entire agency.
We just need to make sure that it's structured the same throughout. So keep the formatting the same. Make sure that it is clear, but not complex.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ridiculously Amazing Insurance Agent Podcast. I'm Kelly Donahue-Pero, and I'm excited today because we are going to talk all about procedures and policies and processes and the importance of them. I just want everybody to know we do have, if you're struggling with processes and procedures, our process pack. So you can buy a process individually, or you can go ahead and get all 10 ridiculously amazing processes so that you don't have to recreate the wheel. And I think a lot of times people struggle. We're going to talk about that today. How to start a process, how to finish it, where to go, because staring at a blank piece of paper is also difficult. And I think it's also difficult to think, we all kind of dive down into what if it's Taco Tuesday, there's a full moon, Sally's out, and the hard customer calls, will this process work? In reality, we need to stay a little bit more high level. So I am joined here today by Therese Potter and Stephen Harrington, and we are excited to kind of dive into the meat, the guts, the potatoes of this. So a couple of things we're going to talk about just to get us all started. Why every agency needs a procedure manual. If accountability is on your mind, you cannot hold people accountable without something written, process, and procedures, right? Thinking about your agency's needs. What do you need for a procedure manual? I think so many agencies want to buy one off the shelf, which is great, but it will stay on the shelf and no one will use them. So we have to think about that. We're going to talk a little bit about content for your procedure manual, like what goes into it, how you draft the policies and procedures, and then how do you really roll them out and how to get them stuck, right? So our goal today is going to be to talk everything procedure manual. So Therese, would you like to kick us off with just why you are so passionate about the agency's needs for a procedure manual? Because when our outline came out, you were like, I want this topic.
So I have been in 3 different agencies, and the first one I was in had kind of a structure of a manual and then kind of not. So I worked on one for many, many years of just putting stuff together in a notebook, had somebody come in and redo the whole thing. It was great because she rewrote the whole thing by hand, not on a computer, which was, that was a while ago. It's like when somebody comes to you with a question about something, you have the answer because it's in the manual. If you don't have a manual, it's like, oh, I'll just do whatever I want. I'll just wing it. One of the other agencies I was in, I kept saying, do we have a process manual? Oh, yeah, I wrote that. I wrote it. It's all done. I'm like, well, then let's see it. Where is it? Oh, well, I'll get it to you. And, a couple weeks later again. And I'm like, so when you have an agency with so many offices, and if you're acquiring other offices, it's so hard to have everyone, all the humans, doing the same thing. Yes. And you pay them. So it kind of gives you the right to tell them what to do, kind of, sort of. So having this manual, it's just great because you can say, oh, that's on, page 10 of the manual, take a look. And it kind of helps you stay focused, but it also helps guidelines. It puts guidelines somewhere so you can say, this is the guideline. This is how we're going to follow it. Otherwise, you have 15 different offices doing it 15 different ways. And if you have 50 people, then you have 50 different ways because every single person in every office is doing it differently. So it kind of puts it in a box, helps you kind of control things, and helps things be streamlined, are my favorite words.
We also talk, I think that that's a really, really important scenario. And the idea of efficiency, right? So I've seen many people do extra steps, things that were outside of the guidelines of the agency, or people do understeps, right? And they miss key things like sign-offs or sending a letter or a follow-up email. And I think that that is a really big component because every agency that Stephen and I and you talk to, right? Like, my staff's burned out. My staff's overwhelmed. They can't get caught up. And then when we unpeel the onion, it's really a different scene underneath there where they're not using a rater, or they're not using these very big, important pieces of technology to make them efficient. I think a lot of agencies use verbal communication versus written to describe what they'd like to see happen.
Mhm.
Well, and it's so much easier when agencies are smaller. If you build it and then as you grow, you keep adding to it. But once you're huge and you're just winging it and making it as you go, it can be so confusing and it can be frustrating because you'll have one person that's really, really detailed and driven, and they're following these processes and procedures a certain way. And you're like, wow, those are great. And then you try to get other people to follow them, and they're like, oh, we're not going to follow that because it's not required. We're just going to do it our way. And sometimes our way is just not the way. Like quote sheets, when everybody has their different quote sheets. I was in an agency where I created quote sheets and nobody was really using a quote sheet. So I just kind of passed mine around. So everybody kind of ended up using mine. But when people start changing it and doing their own, it's like we've got 50 million different ways we do things. And if we don't follow a process, we forget things.
I'm going to step in here too and say, like, as an agency owner, you need to understand that, like, when I go to Starbucks and I order my coffee, it's the same every single place. If I'm Kelly Donahue, I get one experience, but I'm Kelly Piro and I go somewhere and I get a different experience in your agency, that's also unacceptable. And I think people really need to understand the validity of what Teresa's saying, is that you cannot put up with that. I remember an agency I was at that everybody had a different quote sheet. And literally the producers broke down almost in tears having to go to one quote sheet. It had all the same information on it. It was just in a different, this was here, and they just couldn't deal, like could not handle the idea of changing it. And the whole goal was to get a virtual assistant to help them quote to free them up. And I was like, you all can't give, the one person 15 different ways to quote policies. Like, it's not going to work. And we look at the quote sheet and half of them aren't asking the right questions. And I'm just like, and the agency caved in and said, well, we're just going to let them do what they want. And I said, why? Well, what if they leave? I go, look at their numbers. They're actually not selling all that much. It's not that impressive. So if you just had someone that you could train to take a quote sheet the way you want it done, you would save yourself a ton of money, a ton of diva attitude, and just keep going. And so I just want to be very explicit to the agency owners listening. It's unacceptable to have different people doing different things, because you will not get the same result and you will have a different level of burnout per person. I'm
Well, I
sorry.
think it's hilarious you say that, because when I travel, people sometimes make fun of me showing up with my Starbucks. They're like, oh, we have such a better coffee shop down the road. And I'm like, right. And sometimes the little coffee shops are great and sometimes they're not. So when you have a chance for one coffee and you need it in the morning, you go to what's consistent.
Also,
I'm
they have
not saying
mobile
it's the
ordering
best
and
in
I
the
get in
world.
and out.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's the best in the world. I'm not saying there's not more delicious coffee out there, but it's consistent. I know what I'm going to get every time.
And I just don't think it's fair. And we have some of that going on in some agencies right now. All the producers want to work with this one person because they have the most experience and they do the best job. Well, a procedure manual would just certainly assist with that for sure. Right. Therese, so tell us a little bit too about, like, every agency is different. I think we need to be respectful of that, right? Like, some agencies use VAs, some don't. Some agencies have producers, some don't. Some have processing. Some are 3-person agencies. Some are mega agencies. So how do you know what your agency needs as far as a procedure manual?
Well, you've got to start off by analyzing. You've got to analyze how many employees you have, what those employees are doing. If you have VAs, just like tailoring an education or a class to your students, you have to tailor the manual to your staff. It's going to be different for every single agency. So you can't take one size fits all. You can't just download an insurance agency procedure manual and expect that to work. You have to look at how many offices, how many locations, how many employees, what are those employees doing? Are they sales alone and service alone? Because some agencies have sales and service separately. Some agencies have your CSRs that are doing everything. They're doing service and sales. So you have to basically tailor it to the staff. And of course, then you also have to give them guidelines, especially with VAs and that kind of thing too, because once they start using the VAs, they can start overusing the VAs for things that are inappropriate, or underusing them because they want to do it all themselves. So you have to be specific on, okay, this is the process and procedure for payments. This is, when the person calls in for a payment, this is what you need to say. You need to ask if they want to go on EFT or pay in full. And they're like, but I asked that last time. and you're going to ask it every single time until you
That's what I say is in the procedure manual, and it's not your choice.
Yes. And when the customer complains about it, you just say, this is part of my job and this is something that I have to ask because I know I can save you money if you're on EFT or Painful and time. Not just saving you money, I'm saving you money and time. So we have to make sure that we're making it tailored to our staff, the amount of staff we have, the amount of locations, the differences, and we have to think about the types of the geographical locations. Sometimes our locations are a little bit different, so our procedures may need to be very cut and clear because our agencies may have different customers that come in because of the different environments. But we still have to make sure that we have, this is how you do this, this is how you do this, this is how you do this, and it should work generalized for your entire agency.
I love that. And just remember what she said, right? Like, it's your choice as the agency owner. We are not in a scenario where everybody gets to do what they want because we think about everybody's feelings. Well, I like to do it this way. Phenomenal. When you own an agency, you can do it that way. Until then, we're going to do it this way because there's other things to consider. And you all know this is like when I hear someone say, well, my customers, I go, they are not your customers. Unless you own that book, they are the agency's customers, and we will do what the agency wants because they have to balance all the resources and all of the customers. Where people get jammed up is thinking every customer is a unique little snowflake that's so individual, and that's great. And
But I am.
well, they can be, but you can't overdo it and spend 4 hours with one and none with another. Like that
Right.
doesn't also work. So, Stephen, how do we start creating content for the manual, right? Like you've done this, you were COO of an agency, you sit down looking at a blank screen, right? And you're like, where do I even begin? And a lot of people creating it might not be on the front lines doing that job day in and day out either.
So I think one of the things we need to do is have that like Zen moment and not overthink it. I think a lot of times we're like, but there's 4,000 things that we need to do, and we need 4,000 processes, and we need all these different things. And we start to get overwhelmed because then we go down the rabbit hole of, well, if somebody calls, like you said, on the third Thursday of June and it's a full moon, but then it's also the summer solstice and there's a strong breeze, then we're not going to be able to do this. My mindset is always like, hey, can we get it to work 80 to 90% of the time? If 8 out of 10 times it's hitting every time and solid, we can then build it from there. But I think we need to make a punch list of all of our wants and needs and then just pick one.
Just start.
Stop overthinking it. Just start. Like, stop, look for resources, use the process pack that we have available, or go online and just acquire from someone else. Make it your own. Like, creative enterprise is great, right? Sometimes you just need something to get started. You're going to be like, this is the stupidest process ever. But I can kind of see the format and I'll take it and make it mine.
That's kind of how I feel like when we did the how to answer and transfer phone calls. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm writing this. And then everybody's like, you have that? We need
You have a process for answering calls.
Like, haven't we been doing this for so long, answering the phone? And why is it always a problem? Like, why is it such, this is my favorite. I give great customer service, but I don't want to answer the phone. Stop it, people.
We give great customer service. We return all voicemails within 72 hours.
Woo!
I think they kind of look at it as, oh my gosh, process and procedure manual, and they think of this big, huge book, and they don't know where to start. And I was talking to my team the other day about some of the changes that we're making and all of the things we're adding, and I was like, okay, don't get overwhelmed. We're going to take it step by step. So grab a chunk, grab a process, like Stephen said, work on that process, finish that process, grab another one, work on that one, but don't look at it as a big, huge thing. Take it in steps, because if you try to take it in a big chunk, it's going to overwhelm you and you'll never finish it.
That is so true.
One of the other things we need to really do too is take a step back and make sure it's not it's not a 4,000 page process on something simple. I think, again, sometimes we try to make it so clear and put all the what ifs in that it just gets overwhelming and nobody can understand or follow it. So what I found to be really effective at the last agency I was at is we did a process every other week. We were always ahead. Like, the leadership team was like, hey, which normally was me, and I'd be like, hey, here's the new process. I'd send it over to somebody else to review and find all the holes in it. Like, can you follow this process and get this accomplished? If not, it came back to me. but we were always 2 weeks ahead on the processes so we could roll it out to the team on the team meeting. So we were like, hey guys, here's what we're going to work on for the next 2 weeks. And we kind of monitor for that 2 week period. And they just got into they're like, it's always changing. And I'm like, it's always going to change. We're all trying to get on the same page. But we had multiple locations that were all through acquisition, and everybody was doing things their own way. So I couldn't just come out and say, great, here's 40 new things and I need you to do all of them. It was, here's the most important one. Like, this is my biggest pain point right now. Let's start small and let's get in a habit. But then the change just became constant. And if there was a 2 week period where there was no new process, they'd be like, we don't get a process today. We're not learning something new today.
No,
And it was like,
been taken away from
got
you.
upset about it. And I was like, no, it's a 2 week break. And they're like, well, this is dumb. And I'm like, because you like it now, right? Like once you get in the habit. But I think that we just need to make sure that it's structured the same throughout. So keep the formatting the same. Make sure that it is clear, but not complex. Like, I don't know what a flooferlugan is. We don't need to talk about it. We need to break it down into simple English that people can understand and follow.
I was gonna say, I love what you said though, too, about like the change scenario. I think part of the issue, like I struggle with this because we tend to change things a lot here, but things are broken. And so I'm always like, okay, so we have a choice. We have to change because X, Y, not necessarily broken, that might be aggressive, but like there's a better way to do it, or we're finding a snag, or we're getting client feedback. So we should just stay and do the same.
Don't put our head in the sand and ignore it.
Or we don't adapt like a new piece of technology that we have. And so, I get it. Some people want to have Groundhog Day, right? Like every day is the same and we just do the same thing over and over and over again. And that's like, to me, is my worst nightmare. So what I would recommend is like, if that's what you truly want in life, you need to go find a non-growing agency to work for because they're not going to change. They're going to still be their paper files. And now I've heard twice in 1 week, my agencies have bought agencies where the owners just sits there and smokes cigarettes inside the office. And I go, so if you don't want change, that's not even legal. Not even a legal scenario. Change is inevitable. And here's the thing, like we're being demanded to change with a hard market too. So don't like the change side of it all. That's why it's written. You have to go back to, it might take you a minute and that's okay. So one of the things I think that also helps people a lot is the idea of forms and checklists too. Like, okay, can I check my endorsement? Can I have an endorsement form? Because if we're doing processes right, the hard part is they sit in a file somewhere and I've got all my screens up and I don't necessarily have my endorsement process out all the time while I'm doing something, or I'm on the phone trying to do first call resolution and here's a process and then everything gets overwhelming and we tend to just go back the way that we were doing it because there's a lot of resistance. I think another thing that, we have in a lot of our process packs and processes is, hey, why don't you just do a checklist or a form? And then that way, whatever you do at the end, you can catch your mistake or catch your scenario or input the data into the form so it tells you the next step. And then that can make things a lot easier so you don't miss a step. In insurance, we have 85 logins, all these steps with procedures. I think people want it memorized, and I'm just not seeing a clear path today with everything that we have to know to have it memorized consistently and do everything. We might do 75%, but we're not doing that extra wow factor a lot of the time because we're getting the task done, but not the other items like confirming contact information or documenting correctly or asking for a referral or going ahead and say, well, I have you on the phone. You mind if I review your policy real quick, make sure everything's up to date? Like we're missing those things under the idea of like, well, I did the endorsement, but to me, that is no longer enough, right?
I've been in agencies where the certificates of insurance, COIs, they'll just drop everything to do the COIs. And I'm like, why don't we have a form that we request that they fill out? And then we get all this updated information and then we do the certificate. And people are so against processes and procedures. They just want to drop everything and do it so they can look busy.
I agree with that. So if we look at this, drafting your policies and procedures, I think it's really important that this is a key factor. I see a lot of agents be like, we're going to get a committee together. I said, I think that's great. Someone has to be the lead, right? Somebody has to be like, I'm going to gather your feedback and then I'm going to do what's best. And you need to state that up front, no negotiations. We'll consider everybody's feedback, but it's not going to be something where we're going to make everybody happy. And what you find is when you start having a committee that's too big or too dysfunctional, a process takes freaking 6 months.
Or 9.5. Not making fun of anybody.
Yeah. I was in a meeting where a consultant came in and made groups and said, okay, this is what this group's going to do. This is what this group's going to do. And he came in and he was like, okay, this is what you're going to do. Go. With no guidance, no nothing, just go. And it was just a nightmare.
So your goal is going to be really just to understand a bit more about the idea is to get them out. They will always maneuver and they will always change, but a process that's taken that long is not going to work, right? I think the biggest thing is, when we talk about rolling it out to the team, have a party. Make it fun. Don't make it like, here's your procedure. Let's go read it line by line. Give it to people in advance so they can get themselves all worked up when they read it. No one has any time, but you release a process, you will see people come in with their laundry list of things they don't like with it. And again, it's not meant to make everybody happy. So many times I think the frontline team puts themselves ahead of the customer. Well, this can take me more time, but is it the right thing to do? Right? So it doesn't matter if it takes you more time, and you're going to save time if you do XYZ in first call resolution. So that is a big scenario. And Therese, do you mind sharing with our viewers right now, what are some of the tools we have to help people? Because I do think it's overwhelming for a lot of agencies to build a procedure manual, right? We did one and it took us a whole 90 days without having to think about Sally and Bobby and this carrier and that. And so what kind of tools do we have for everybody?
We have our 10 processes, and then we have process packs that we've separated those processes out into individuals. So if you're looking for 10, we've got the 10 grouped together. If you're looking for just one, we have them separated. You can choose the processes you're looking for. And basically what it does is gives you a general guideline of how to walk through what you need. So it's like an outline. So you get these outlines and then you customize the outlines to your agency. And that's the goal. You need a general, if you need a general outline to follow, that's what we have for you. We have a general outline that you can go through as a leader, your management team, and you guys can go through and outline everything you need for your agency. So it's a great place to start to get you started on this process and procedures manual. So it's not this big, huge thing, but it's step-by-step processes that will help you move forward and get those done.
Absolutely. So just keep in mind, everybody, that we need to make sure that we have a procedure manual. There is no time like the present. It's not going to get better. And I want to be very clear too. If you're talking about hiring people is hard, a procedure manual will expedite your training process for someone who has experience or someone who does not have experience. Because even though somebody has experience, okay, what I want to say is that they did it a different way. Steve and me, Therese, talk to agencies all the time. I cannot tell you how many different variations there are of doing things in an agency. And I've got one agency right now where there's one person who's like, well, when I worked with producers, they filled out a full quote sheet. And I was like, well, you're in personal lines and most of these producers are high-end commercial. They're just going to give you a name and a number. How do I know what they want? You need to fill out your own quote sheet. She's like, I'm not comfortable with that. She's like panicking, right? We have to realize that even though they know insurance, they're still going to come with all the ways that they learned. And in their frame of reference, that's the only way to do it. So that would be like me going to Spain and expecting that I'm going to get a grilled cheese. You're going to be like, huh? It's not cool. Or, so we have to identify that sometimes I think it's actually harder for the new people that are coming with experience than it is to just learn it the first way.
And I just wanted to go in and plug what those processes and procedures that we have, the 10, they're answering the phone, proof of insurance, payment, endorsements, file documentation, cancellations, rewrites, new business, renewals, and claims.
Yes, and more will be being developed as we come along. So don't forget that. So check it out. You can come to our website. You could buy them all right on our website. You don't have to talk to anybody. But like I said, I can't think of another way that we need to focus other than we got to get the procedures down pat. Yeah. So one quick thing, if you had a good time on this podcast, we're going to talk next. Does your agency need a checklist for things? Ooh. I know my answer, so you'll have to stay tuned for everybody else's. All right, everybody, thank you so much. We hope that you have a great day and let us know if there's anything that you need. We're signing off as the insurance industry's best friend.